During the fight for the Argonne Forest, which was the big American show of World War I, you have all these divisions lined up, and they're all pushing northwards through this massive forest to finally defeat the Germans. We're out of the trenches now. We're going from trenches into open warfare, which is what Pershing had really envisioned for the American Army. This is what we were best at. The directions are given. Don't worry about keeping up with the guys on your flank. Just push forward. And one battalion finds itself in a position where the Germans had meanwhile been readjusting their line and left this gap open. And they come through the gap and get to a ravine up from Charlevoix Mills, and then the Germans realize what's happened and they close in behind them.
For 6 days in October of 1918, one of the most memorable episodes of the Meuse-Argonne offensive unfolds on the hill behind me. During this 6 days, 9 companies of men from the U.S. Army 77th Infantry Division were surrounded by the enemy. They were from 6 companies of the 308th Infantry Regiment, 1 company of the 307th Infantry, and then 2 companies of the 306th Machine Gun Battalion, a force comprising 554 men. For 6 days, these 554 men from the 77th Division, they were referred to as the Lost Battalion, and that's a name that has stuck. The Lost Battalion on this hilltop suffered through savage combat with the Germans. They dealt with supply shortages, shortages of food and water, and then, of course, shortages of ammunition. Ammunition was keenly felt because of the fact that their weapons fired 3 different calibers. The officers carried the model of 1911 45 caliber pistol. The men of the 306th Heavy Machine Gun Battalion, they were armed with the French model 1914 machine gun, firing the 8x50 millimeter rimmed or 8 millimeter Lebel cartridge. There were also model 1915 Chauchat light machine guns on the hilltop. They also fired 8 millimeter Lebel. But then the riflemen themselves were armed with the U.S. model of 1917 30 caliber manually operated bolt action rifle.
So one of the problems faced by this rapidly expanding American military, where are you going to get guns for them all? Well, the U.S. model of 1903 Springfield rifle was in production at Springfield. It was also in production at Rock Island. But setting up factories to make the 03 rifle in time simply wasn't possible. Thanks to our British allies, a solution was right there. The British had decided in 1913 to adopt the pattern 1913 rifle in a new .276 cartridge, but then the war broke out. They changed their plans. They decided to make the rifle the pattern 14, and 3 plants in the United States had contracts with the British government and produced huge quantities of pattern 1914 rifles.
To equip the British, they manufactured these in 303 or 303 right up until the time America declares war in April of 1917. And then we start converting them to produce them in 30-06 for our own army. Just a small stock configuration changes and the guns are nearly identical.
Most importantly, the bolt face had to be altered. The 303 is a rimmed cartridge. The 30-06 is not. So they had to change the dimensions of the bolt face, the shape of it, in order to adapt it to the 30-06. The good news is it was an easy conversion, and the Ordnance Department, one of the smartest things they did during the Great War was to adopt the U.S. model of 1917 rifle.
Numerically, this was the primary rifle of American fighting forces fighting in the American Expeditionary Force on the Western Front in the First World War, because more Model 1917 rifles went off to war than Model 1903s. The Lost Battalion on this hilltop were facing pressure from not only German forces, but then eventually even friendly fire. because at one point during the 6 days of being surrounded, American artillery begins falling within their perimeter as the shells land around them, causing casualties and killing men. Major Whittlesey charges off a note very quickly that says, "Our artillery is dropping a barrage on us. For heaven's sake, stop it." He charges this note off, rolls it up, puts it in a lead canister that then goes onto a pigeon named Cher Ami, who's remembered here on the memorial. Cher Ami is then released, flies directly to the 77th Divisional Headquarters. When the note reaches them, the word goes out very quickly to cease fire on this artillery concentration. So in this critical way, a pigeon contributes significantly to the survival of the beleaguered force on this hilltop.
Major Whittlesey's men were surrounded and alone for 6 days of intense combat. Towards the end of the fighting, the Germans lost patience with the lost battalion. They wanted them out of there. So they sent in one of the most horrific weapons of the Great War, the German Flammenwerfer. This is a flamethrower. And for troops out in the open, it's a horrifying weapon. Thankfully, men of the 306th Machine Gun Battalion still had one working Model 1914 Hotchkiss. They used the last rounds with the last working gun to dispatch the Flammenwerfer crew.
The gun itself is gas operated, operates from a tripod, and is fed with a unique Hotchkiss design. It's a stripper clip.
The gun was too heavy to pick up and move. So whether you liked it or not, it was static warfare. In my opinion, the lasting influence of the Hotchkiss was that it demonstrated the tactical need for light, portable, automatic weapons. It may be an unpleasant reality, but the country that came the closest to fulfilling that was France, with the Shot.
So the men from the Lost Battalion aren't just from the same battalion. So what does this mean? Each of the platoons of that company, and there's 4 platoons per company, has 4 shows. The show is made fun of today as the worst machine gun ever. Well, I've shot them. It's not the worst machine gun ever, especially when used within its limitations. The show, if it was on sustained fire for too long, would heat up, that barrel jacket would cause friction, the gun would hang up until it would cool again. It's a terrible magazine design. But that said, if you can keep debris out of the magazine of the show, it's going to work, and it's going to work pretty well.
This action from October 2 to October 8 demonstrates the toughness, the tenacity, and stubbornness of American infantrymen in France during World War I. But not only infantrymen of the 77th Division earned the Medal of Honor in this place. There were 2 aviators from the 50th Aero Squadron that gave their lives to try and locate and tell the rest of the AEF where these men were. They were Lieutenant Gettler and Lieutenant Bleckley.
By the time that an American relief force reached the men on this hilltop on October 8th, the force had suffered 197 killed in action. 150 men were missing or prisoners of war. 194 were left capable of walking off the hilltop at the end of the action. And so the experience of the Lost Battalion on the hill here in the Meuse-Argonne Offensive has created a legacy that we remember today, a full century later.